This ideology created by films was a lethal kind of poetry, but the only poetry available. And at least they gave some kind of illusion. I was born and raised in Argentina. I thought the life in the small town in the Pampas was another film that I hadn't chosen to see.
As a little boy, he would go to the movies. Almost every day in this tiny movie theater with wooden seats he sat. That was his escape.
Because the life in the small town was worse than anything possible, worse than poison. So the moment the film was on, it was purification.
He found reality in the classic Hollywood movies of the 1930s and 40s. In Jean Harlow, Greta Garbo, Rita Hayworth. Women living in a male-dominated society who somehow got exactly what they wanted in the end.
So as far as I can remember, the only thing that made a man feel well was power. The power of money or the power of the fist. Reflection or sensitivity had no prestige whatsoever. Men had to be sure of themselves, and if you were not pushing somebody around, you didn't have your diploma. You needed somebody underneath. That gave you identity. I could see nothing but betrayal and degradation. It was a sickness in Argentina.
This was a very bad time in Argentina. People were disappearing. The forces of repression were everywhere. Repression and censorship. The year was 1973. He'd been getting death threats.
Argentina in those days was under a military regime, and the censorship conditions were quite peculiar. I was in a long list with left-wing people who had endorsed Peronism. The AAA, a Nazi organization protected by Isabel Perón, called my parents' house to ask me to leave the country in 24 hours, or else.
As he was preparing to flee, he got word that the authorities had just released some political prisoners, and he just flew to them, to talk to them, to try to find out what this experience was like. He spent hours interviewing them, taking notes about their daily life, about surviving the torture. And he fled his Argentine homeland forever, but he left with an idea, the seed of an idea that would become his next novel, Kiss of the Spider-Woman. But really the book wasn't about Marxist revolutionaries or political prisoners at all. It was about social oppression, about submission to macho domination. That was Manuel's central theme throughout all his life, the role of the submissive woman.
I left Argentina because I feared I would develop self-censorship if I stayed there. My novels had been translated into many languages, and that allowed me to live in exile without problems. And suddenly, the Argentinian readers discovered me, and I became a bestseller. I have never believed in explicit political novels.
Tráilers.
I've never written one. I want to deal with real characters. And if they are so, they inevitably establish a political environment. And I believe in the subversive power of the unconscious. What I wanted to do in 73 was something about the submissive woman. It was the beginning of the big polemic of feminists, and I agreed with the women's liberation movement totally, but I thought there was one aspect being neglected. If the role of the submissive woman had survived so many centuries, it had been because it presented some kind of advantage. It couldn't have been all bad. No? So I wanted to know what was the pleasure behind the submissive woman's role. So I wanted to do a novel about that, but I couldn't find a living model of a woman interesting enough that would defend the submissive woman's role. No? I wanted her to be the center of the novel. Somebody being articulate enough, to say, no, I want to stay this way. I like it, I enjoy it. So I started to look for a model, since I always work with that method. Not inventing too much, but copying from reality. And I couldn't find, in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, in 72, 73, I couldn't find one single woman totally convinced that role wasn't. Everybody had doubts. So one day I hear a voice, not feminine, but effeminate, saying, "Oh, I'd love to be, I'd love to be dominated." So I said, the only woman left to defend this is one who cannot make the real experience. So that is the main character in the novel. It's the only woman alive ready to defend that fabulous proposition. And well, that was the beginning of this novel, of Kiss of the Spider Woman.
Manuel Puig's novel, Kiss of the Spider-Woman, comes to us mainly as dialogue between the two characters, with nothing of the scene described visually. Making a film of the novel, on the other hand, means transposing it into something mainly visual. The filmmaker's task is to try to convey some of the novel's ideas visually. And this beautifully filmed work, I think, is quite successful at this. For instance, when the novel begins, for a while we only hear Molina's voice narrating the plot of a movie. When the film begins, as with the novel, we merely hear, in voiceover, Molina's voice telling the story of the movie. But in the film, meantime, the camera is lovingly panning around the prison cell. Objectively, it's just a grim cell, but in fact it's rather beautiful, with its rich, subdued colors, its textures of ropes and bars, its scribbled artworks, its hanging silks. It's like an installation. It's like a piece of pop art, ending at Molina's shrine to pop art, with his pictures of movie stars and paraphernalia of beauty. Of course, this is the theme. People are imprisoned in their grey lives. In the novels and the movies metaphor, they are literally imprisoned in their grey lives by their violent culture, their oppressive government, and they can only find release in art with its possibility of beauty and tenderness. Even kitsch art, which is really the only art available to them, can ease the pain. The scene changes into the black and white of the narrated movie, as Molina describes, and we see, the contraband food being brought in by the Jewish mafia. Molina asks Valentine what he thinks of this romantic film so far. Valentine says, "It helps pass the time. It doesn't help any great cause." Here's their split. Manuel Puig thinks we live in a world of machismo, not just Latin America, but the whole West. A system based on power, with boys over girls, men over women, a dictator over the state. Molina, in what he thinks of as his role as woman, submits to the system, but also escapes from it through his romantic movies. Valentine the gorilla wants to fight it, violence against violence, to make it better. But he's also a part of it, so he constantly needs to fight his own machismo, his own tendency to violent anger. Movies are everything to Molina. To Valentine, only a way to kill time when you're not actively creating the new world. The Germans catch the weird smugglers. We see Valentine's look of anxiety, thinking of police catching him and his friends. The story, despite his contempt for it, is beginning to touch him directly. Valentine realizes the, quote, weird smugglers are meant to be Jews. Don't you get it? It's a Nazi propaganda film. Come on. That's just the background. Here's the important part about the lovers. In the big chic party of the Nazi high command, Lenny sings the song Je me moque de l'amour, and she and Werner lock eyes. The wonderfully stilted acting of the film within the film helps to set it apart from the, quote, reality of the prison cell, and also underlines the kitschiness of the art. Molina only sees the romance. Valentine only sees that it's a Nazi propaganda film. Both their views are true, but both their views are partial. The Nazi film has its exaggerated romanticism, and it also has its anti-Semitism. And additionally, as we shall see later, it is acting out the themes that Molina and Valentine are living. They will need to go some way towards seeing each other's side before they can be complete themselves. Making a kitsch Nazi film comment complexly on their lives is Puig's way of raising the popular art kitsch up to a higher form of art. There's something else interesting here in the way the novel has been transposed into movie form. I've said the artificiality of the Nazi film makes the scenes in the cell seem by contrast even more realistic. Something like this happens in the novel. In the novel, Puig has a series of footnotes running underneath the novel text, with scholarly essays on homosexuality, which is a way Puig can spell out some of his ideas that are only implicit in the novel. But in the same way the scholarly notes, while commenting on the novel, by the contrast of their academic prose, help to make the characters in the novel seem more realistic. Valentine, bloody and bruised from his torture, laughs at the movie. "I'm laughing at you and me." Does he mean by this his embarrassment at having been momentarily carried away by the film? They bring a tortured, hooded figure into the prison. Molina asks Valentine if he knows him. Sounds like an innocent question, and we might overlook it, but it shows that at this point Molina is working for the warden to get information from Valentine, so that Molina can get his sentence reduced, as we learn later. As the film progresses and he gets more and more attached to Valentine, he'll begin working against the warden, even though that harms his own cause. We work this out gradually, reading the novel. In this tightly edited screenplay, where there isn't time to repeat things, we have to be very alert to catch this here. We get a larger shot of the interior of the prison, which gives us, and probably the cameraman as well, a little break from the confinement of the four walls of the cell. But it also shows us Valentine trying to get a look into the other prisoner's cell to try to see who it is, if it's one of his fellows. Molina tries to talk to Valentine but Valentine is distant. He is still trying to see into the other cell, to see the tortured prisoner, who is obviously being brought to the cell after interrogation. What's the matter? Molina wants to know. Valentine says, I'm still trying to figure out why they stopped my interrogation. If he doesn't quite suspect Molina of treachery, he is still suspicious of what the police are up to. Molina, always the ready and expert liar, as a diversion for his own guilty knowledge that they're not interrogating Valentine while they wait to see if Molina can get anything out of him, changes the subject to, oh, why couldn't they have given me that handsome blonde leading man for my cellmate instead of you? And the generally unsuspicious Valentine is easily diverted. He's about as romantic as the warden's torture room, which perhaps brings Molina back to his original guilt. Valentine looks out the window at night, and we can see he has an unobstructed view of the city. At the end of the film, Molina will be looking out his window at home, and we will realize he can look from the city straight back at this window. The cigarette girl confesses to Lenny that she's having a baby by a German lieutenant. How can you love the enemy? Lenny asks. Love has no country, she answers. Later, Lenny herself falls in love with Werner and faces the same dilemma. Popular art, even in this Nazi propaganda film, it's suggested, arrives at certain truths, that you love who you love, not who you're supposed to love. Valentine will later have to admit he doesn't love his girlfriend in the movement. He loves Marta, his bourgeois girlfriend, the enemy. In fact, Valentine is perhaps already getting defensive because Lenny is hit home when she says, how can you love the enemy? Valentine turns on Molina. How can you remember all this crap? You must be making it up. Molina says, no, I'm not. Well, I embroider a little. In other words, Molina is being a pop artist himself, taking the materials of the movie and twisting them a bit for his own purposes. I embroider a little, he says, so you can see it the way I do. God help me, Valentine says, a little nastily, meaning if he's made to see it through the eyes of a queer. So Molina gets him back a little. You atheists never stop talking about God. And you gays never face facts. Fantasy is no escape. Molina says, fantasy is my escape. Valentine says, then your life is as trivial as your movies. Later, Molina is still trying to get him. Tell the truth. Who do you identify with? The clubfoot patriot or the handsome Werner? In other words, if he's so opposed to the Nazi propaganda, does he identify with the nasty, crippled resistance leader instead of the cultured German? Valentine can't answer this one, so he gets out of it by asking Molina who he identifies with, and Molina is happy to answer. The star, the heroine. This is a key scene. You can linger over things in a novel, build a concept incrementally, but everything has to be done quickly in a film, one scene to one idea that's being advanced. Molina offers him part of his avocado, and Valentine refuses, saying indulging in something just for pleasure would weaken him in his struggle for the cause. Molina says, what kind of cause is it that won't let you eat an avocado? Valentine's position is made to look foolish, which perhaps is why he responds angrily. Molina's hurt at his rebuff of the intended kindness of sharing the avocado, and he sulks. Valentine says, why do you always respond like a what? Molina challenges him. Like a woman? And Valentine has given away his own underlying machismo, his own sexism. And we see that his Marxist studies, which should have shown him everyone as equally valuable, men and women, have still not quite prevailed over the early training his machoistic society has given him. And then Molina comes in with his final argument. What's the matter with women? What's the matter with being sensitive? If women were running things, there would be less violence. And Valentine, who has not developed far enough to value tenderness, who has only got as far as turning his own violence against the violence of the government, has no answer for anything Molina has said. A lot has been set up in this small scene towards Valentine coming closer to Molina's philosophy of giving a value to pleasure and tenderness. Valentine, a bit suspicious, wants to know why the warden wanted to see Molina. Molina, the consummate plausible liar, as he is with the warden, says, My lawyer phoned to say I can't get parole. But there's still a little niggling suspicion, and Valentine asks, how did the warden treat you? Like a faggot, like always, is the perfect, reassuring answer. Also, Molina adds, my mother's not doing well with her weak heart. Valentine, perhaps under Molina's influence, trying to develop some tenderness, tries to comfort him. People with weak hearts like that can go on forever. Valentine says, go to sleep, Molina, but Molina can't, perhaps thinking about his mother, or perhaps about his treachery to Valentine. No, he says, only one thing can comfort me, by which it's understood he means telling the movie. Valentine says, sure, tell it, man. Man? Oh, is there a man in here? Don't let him get away. Molina, with his small grin, looking quite girlish and pretty, and even Valentine smiles. Lenny goes off to dinner with Werner. The classic descent of the stairs, her body changing direction with the flights, but always her profile the same way, looking towards Werner. The cigarette girl in the Nazi movie goes off to see her lieutenant. The scene is shot in a sort of sepia black and white. From his top-floor apartment, he throws down the keys. She stoops to pick them up. The evil resistance leaders race towards her in their van. She looks up at them. Then from the lieutenant's top-floor point of view, we see her body attractively sprawled. The scene is so aesthetic, so posed, it is more like a ballet than a murder. And yet the cynical Valentine is moved by it, thinks of the danger his girlfriend in the resistance daily runs. Popular art and all its artificiality still speaking to his real life. Molina, for once, seems almost a little frightened at the power of his art. It's only a movie, he says, but it has got to Valentine. I'm so helpless in here to protect her. You do have a heart, Molina says. Molina says, write to her, tell her to quit taking chances. Valentine says, if you think like that, you'll never change anything. Molina says, now who's living in a fantasy? Valentine shows him the torture scar on his back. Is this a fantasy? Now it's Molina who's trying to comfort him. Someday you'll win, he lies. By a mix-up, Molina is made to eat the food which has been poisoned to weaken Valentine's resistance, so that Molina can get information out of him. This is just when Valentine tells Molina, if they didn't need my information, they would kill me on the spot. Don't say things like that, Molina moans. He is really frightened he's going too far in his double-dealing. Molina cries because true love is so beautiful, and he can't find a real man, one who's humble and yet has dignity. Now Valentine is scoring points on Molina. Molina says you begin to feel empty working as a window dresser. This is Molina's own popular art expression as a window dresser, his attempt to create beauty. But this and always putting present pleasure first, he begins to see are not enough to base a life on. The two very opposite characters are beginning to come together. In his role as woman in the society that he still largely accepts, Molina sees his cause is in serving a real man. Molina tells Valentine about Gabriel, the one he thinks has the qualities of a real man. But it is clear to us Gabriel is exploiting him, and at the end of the scene leaves him sexually unfulfilled, so that Molina lets a young hustler pick him up, which may be where he got in trouble and was arrested. What is a real man? Valentine asks. Molina's true man is not the society's violent macho man. His is marvelous-looking, strong, but not making a fuss about it. Valentine comes back with his idea of a real man, and they're not far apart. He says a real man doesn't take any crap, but most important, he also doesn't humiliate anyone, doesn't let anyone feel degraded. Where they really differ at this moment is, Valentine thinks Molina is a man too, and should strive to have these qualities. Molina is sick from the poison, and as always at such moments, tells the movie, the expression of art, to ease the pain. Lenny is told to get the map, but easily escapes from the evil resistance leaders, who are shown with wonderful political incorrectness to be club-footed and deaf, unlike the perfect Germans. Molina is in the infirmary, and Valentine wanders around the cell. looks at Molina's necklace, and we realize he's missing him. The two of them are coming closer together personally. The Nazi movie has its romantic love stories, but a quieter love story is going on in the cell. This brief scene, without a word spoken, is able to make its point visually and with an economy and suggestiveness that would be difficult for the novel to match. Did you ever fall in love with someone you didn't want to? And Valentine very defensively shoots out, "What do you mean?" In the novel you can read at your own speed, look back over a scene you've already read. In the tight economy of this screenplay, you only rush forward. So you must be quick to pick up on his defensiveness, to know it's because what he is dealing with, what this film he is so contemptuous of has confronted him with, is that he is himself in love with a bourgeois woman, one of the enemy. But at this point, Molina is only innocently setting up Lenny's dilemma in the film. She didn't want to fall in love with Werner, the enemy. Werner has his classic descent of the stairs to match hers, his body turning but his head always towards Lenny. It's really quite magnificent. They bring in the tortured prisoner from interrogation just at the most romantic part of the movie. Valentine beats his cup against the bars. "They're murdering one of my brothers while I'm listening to your Nazi movie." He throws a cup at Molina. His response is complex. We suspect it is mainly frustration with his powerlessness against the state's violence that makes him in turn violent towards someone less powerful, in the usual macho hierarchy. But probably also there is his defensiveness that he himself is in love with one of the enemy, and his anger with himself that he is himself drawn into the story. But all of it turned on Molina. He throws Molina down, has a furious tirade against him for not knowing it's a fascist movie, like this fascist prison. Doesn't he realize? He leaves Molina cowering on the floor, begging, "Don't look at me like that." Because of Valentine's judgmental look, Molina flashes back to his trial, the judge sentencing him, and feeling so sorry for his mother, the one person who never judges him. In a telling scene, Molina says, "If he ever says anything bad about my mother, I'll strangle the son of a bitch with his piss-ass revolution." He's taking on some of Valentine's violent response, and within the film's context, this is negative. Valentine is being a bad influence, spreading violence, even to the gentle Molina. They're not speaking to each other after Valentine's outburst. The food comes. Molina carefully looks to see which plate is which, and this time Molina gives the poisoned food to Valentine, and we see he is doing it quite vindictively. Still under Valentine's influence, that violence is the proper response to violence. But of course he feels bad the moment Valentine is sick, and tells the movie to help him forget his pain. Lenny and Werner dance round and round, Lenny feeling secure, and they end with a kiss, and Valentine is lulled to sleep. And in that sleep, he says his true love's name, Marta, and now his secret is out. Molina tries to advise Valentine against eating the prison food, but Valentine is starving. By this time, Molina is in love with Valentine and is no longer working for the warden, even though that works against his own cause. Lenny overhears Werner asking for executions. Her fingers tremble at betraying the man she loves. Molina, as he says that, looks at his own fingers, and at that moment, Valentine groans with pain. Valentine, sick again, is laughing with Molina as Molina clowns around, trying to cheer him up. Then Valentine soils his pants. Molina cleans him up, Valentine ashamed, but Molina obviously enjoying taking care of him. He makes him tea, and Valentine says, "You're very kind." And for the first time he seems to realize this is a value. With the intimacy of this, and with Valentine's resistance being broken down by the repeated poisoning, when Molina asks him who Marta is, he's ready to confess all. Not the guerrilla secrets the warden wanted to hear, but the secrets of his heart that Molina wanted. That Valentine's discipline told him he should be attached, but not too attached, to his girlfriend and the resistance. But in truth he was in love with his bourgeois girlfriend, and it was thinking about his love for her that he escaped to while he was being tortured. Valentine tells him, "She told me to choose between her and the movement, and I left her." Valentine tells the story of giving Dr. Americo his passport, but begins with that line, "I no longer believed in violence, but I had to do something, so as a journalist I would hear about illegal arrests and torture and leak the information abroad. I no longer believed in violence, but we have seen how difficult it still is for him to control his violent reaction. Perhaps it's especially difficult for him in his increasing despair. He says to Dr. Americo, 'I keep wondering if it's worth it when nothing changes.' Dr. Americo had accomplished almost nothing. If Molina was finding that a life of beauty and pleasure first, but no love, was not enough, perhaps Valentine was finding that a life of dedication and discipline, but with no beauty or pleasure or love, was equally pointless. Valentine is really down now. "I don't deserve to die in this cell. I can't stand being a martyr. My whole life was a mistake." He means because he chose the abstract movement over his personal happiness with Marta. "No," Molina says, trying to cheer him up. "Don't let me die, Molina." His love for Marta had saved him before. Now he's looking to Molina. "Of course I won't," Molina assures him. We see Molina skillfully manipulating the warden and the policeman. However, they're trying to push things towards a climax, while we imagine Molina would like to freeze things into a changeless present, where he can be with Valentine. Next time they will bring the tortured prisoner back with his hood off, and Molina must say if Valentine reveals his identity. The quicker Valentine talks, the quicker Molina will get out. They have a feast. Molina won't let Valentine have any more prison food, so now he's working against the warden and against his early parole. In a rare moment of plenty, they find that the Nazi movie, which in the economy of this film represents art, is not just a vehicle of escape, but can also serve for positive pleasure and perhaps instruction. Molina now tells the end of the Nazi movie, which of course predicts the end of the film Kiss of the Spider Woman. Leni refuses to love Werner when she thinks he is a butcher, but as soon as she discovers he is only violent for the good of mankind, then she agrees to help him draw the bad resistance leaders into a trap. She's killed in the attempt, dying in order to serve her man. Molina, identifying with Leni, thinks this is supremely beautiful. If the part of the culture that Valentine has bought, at least originally, is a necessity for violence, the part that Molina accepts is the subservience of women. That woman's highest moment is when she sacrifices herself to her man. This is part of Manuel Puig's statement in his novels, that the popular culture, which is all the people have for escape and a sense of beauty, has the deadly danger that it also reinforces the corrupt values of the macho system, and in fact is used by the elite to control the masses, as we see, for instance, in the Nazi propaganda film, which has as its purpose to show how noble and benevolent the fascists are. There are layers of irony and complexity and autobiography here, when we learn that Puig named his heroine after Leni Riefenstahl, a sometime Nazi propagandist herself, but nevertheless one of Puig's favorite filmmakers, one who was also able to raise a propaganda movie to high art. At that moment, they bring in the tortured prisoner without hood, and Valentine says, "That man's Dr. Americo. They don't know he's here." This perhaps is the information the warden wants, but of course Molina is no longer working for him. When next day Molina tells Valentine he saw them carry out Dr. Americo's dead body, Valentine explodes for one last time, calling Molina a faggot. The violence, the homophobia of his macho upbringing erupting one last time. When Molina comes in with more groceries, Valentine is contrite. "It's not even you I was mad at." "Well, I am mad at you. You are so kind to me, and there's no way I can reciprocate." Molina easily teases him out of this last hesitation. Molina says, "I'm nice to you because I want your affection, because you're such a good person, ready to sacrifice your life to your ideals." Here we see Molina has come some way towards Valentine's position, that it is good to do something for society, not just staying with personal pleasure. If women are subservient, they still have their ways of gaining a little bit of control, and that is through manipulation. Molina has been quite expert at manipulating the prison warden and the policeman, who, like many men with absolute power, are not terribly bright. He has got food out of them, and finally maneuvers his parole. But now that he's finally getting it, he no longer wants it. He wants to stay with Valentine. His life outside, he now sees, with its pleasure-first philosophy, is totally meaningless. He tells the movie of the Spider-Woman, how one day a mariner shipwrecked, washed up on her beach, and she takes care of him, fixes his wounds. It is Valentine in the movie, with his torture scars. By now Valentine and Molina have come so close together that they conceal their intimacy with a sexual act. Valentine mercifully blows out the candle to save the audience embarrassment, but it's still a very graphic scene. It's hard to remember where we all were in the early 1980s, but I think this must have been a very brave scene at the time, and William Hurt was certainly a very courageous actor to take on this part. When Molina wakes the next morning, he says, "When I woke, I put my hand to my scar." "You don't have one." "I wasn't me anymore. I was you." In the beginning, they had partial positions. Molina all beauty and pleasure of the moment, Valentine all discipline and the future. Now each has accepted enough from the other that they are finally complete. The warden hands Molina his parole. He kisses the warden's hand, and you rather expect the warden to wipe off the kiss of the faggot, but instead he looks at his hand rather dreamily. In fact, if you watched very closely, when Molina put his hand on the warden's hand to lean down to kiss it, the warden gently caressed Molina's finger. What are the subversive filmmakers suggesting here? It turns out Valentine is a bit of a manipulator as well. He wants Molina to carry a message to his guerrilla group. When Molina tells him he would be too terrified of the police, I don't think he means he would be afraid to risk his life helping Valentine. He means he's afraid the police would torture the information out of him and he would betray Valentine. Molina says, "We've done much more, but we've never kissed." Perhaps he means something like, you can have sex with anybody, but it's only the one you love that you kiss on the lips. Molina wants that kiss, and Valentine agrees, but first you must promise you'll make people respect you, not humiliate you, not exploit you. Molina promises, then asks for the phone number so he can contact Valentine's guerrilla friends. They kiss, and Molina leaves. We see Valentine left behind in the cell. The cell looks very empty, and Valentine is somewhat at a loss. A nice little scene that is not in the novel. Molina buys a beer to prove he is free and outside and can act like a normal citizen. Of course the police are watching his every move, knowing he will lead them to the guerrillas. But even within that he is free. Throughout the film we've been in the cell, and while it is always beautiful, it is also always dark. The walls not far away, only the two characters together. From now on the scenes are bathed in sunlight, with a huge cityscape and sky in the background, people and cars streaming everywhere. The terrific contrast between the quiet, confined inside and the noisy, expansive outside. He meets his Queen friends in the nightclub, and one of them on stage sings to him the same song Lenny had sung to Werner. But obviously it doesn't come up to the high romance he had been living in his imagination. So we feel he is leaving his empty friends behind, because he now has a real man to live up to. We see Molina looking out the window, quote, for no apparent reasons, according to the police who are tailing him. But Puig makes it explicit in the novel that Molina is staring towards the prison. Molina recognizes now that his boyfriend on the outside had been exploiting him, and following Valentin's dictum that he let no one exploit him, he now breaks off with his boyfriend.
Tus tráilers.
There's a quick little scene of Molina sitting with his mother watching television. Evidently this was how Puig himself watched television with his mother, and Puig asked for this to be put in as a little bit of autobiography, a sort of signature in the midst of the film. Then he goes to make the phone call. We hear him say very soberly, "Will that be necessary?" And we understand from that they're asking him to meet them physically, and he knows that probably means his death. He says they will recognize him by the red scarf he will be wearing. There has always been the irony that the overacted Nazi film has been a movie, whereas Valentin and Molina in their cell were, quote, reality. Although somewhere under our suspension of disbelief is our knowledge that the quote reality is only a slightly more realistically acted movie itself. Now, quite appropriately to all the themes of the film, the quote reality of Valentin and Molina begins to coalesce with a Nazi movie, as the realistic part of the film itself turns into a Hollywood movie. The scene where Molina puts on the scarf shows the picture of a Hollywood star on the wall next to him. His mirror has a shell design on it, making it look somewhat like the leading lady's mirror with lights all around it. As Molina carefully adjusts the red scarf around his neck, he has become the star of the movie. Pauline Kael, in a review of Kiss of the Spider-Woman, said the ending is a cop-out, because when Valentin tells him to be a man, he simply stops being a queen so he can become a conventional macho hero. This is not fair to the film. He's not in any way given up being a queen, as you can see when he arranges the scarf around his neck. He has simply refused to be humiliated anymore, partly so he'll be worthy of Valentin's love, but also because Valentin has taught him to have a higher value of his own worth. We then proceed to the shoot-'em-up ending, echoing in many ways the ending of the Nazi movie. Look at the scene where he is in the car, shot and dying, the policeman's gun in his face, shouting faggot at him, threatening him he will have no medical treatment if he doesn't talk. Look at Molina's face, unafraid, unhumiliated, almost serene. Meanwhile, Valentin, tortured and near death, is carried off in a morphine dream by his true love Marta, on their way to the island of the Spider-Woman, the destination of the lonely lovers. Don't worry, she says, you won't wake up in a cell. He pauses, but what about Molina? Only Molina knows, she says, whether he died happy or not. We know that he did. Molina, in a way, has died for the cause, but only in his own terms, only if he is granted stardom in the movie of his death. While Valentin has escaped for his short, happy dream into one of Molina's romantic movies, into the romanticism that Molina has taught him not to be ashamed of. In a way they have crossed over, but really everything has simply come together. They have taken the cheap and kitschy pop art with its secret message of support for power and violence and machismo and the degradation of women, and they have transformed it into their own form of saving beauty and art, just as all of Puig's novels have taken the shoddy materials of popular art and refashioned them into beauty and true art and salvation for all of us.